I didn't mean to learn my neighbor's life by heart. It started with a cough. Not the polite kind you do in public when you're trying to clear your throat. This one sounded raw, exhausted, the kind that echoed through drywall like it had nowhere else to go. I remember pausing mid-scroll on my phone, staring at the wall separating my apartment from his, realizing I'd never actually met the guy living there, but somehow, I was about to know him better than most friends. My name's Gary. I moved into apartment 3B about 8 months ago after a messy breakup and an even messier lease termination. The place was cheap, slightly crooked in all the ways old buildings are, but quiet enough for me to work remotely and pretend my life wasn't in pieces. Except it wasn't quiet. Not really. Because of Hank. I didn't know his name then. All I knew was that through that paper-thin wall, someone lived a life that unfolded like an accidental podcast I never chose to subscribe to. The cough happened first. Then pacing. Heavy footsteps back and forth at night, sometimes stopping long enough for a chair to creak. Occasionally music, low, sad indie stuff with too many acoustic guitars. And once, unmistakably, crying. I remember sitting on my couch that night, laptop glowing in front of me, frozen while muffled sobs slipped through the wall. It felt intrusive to listen, but impossible not to. After that, I started noticing patterns. Mornings meant the sound of a coffee grinder. Afternoons were quiet, probably work. Evenings sometimes brought phone calls. Hank had a deep voice, calm but tired, the kind that carried warmth even when he sounded drained. "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine," I heard one evening, his voice vibrating faintly through the plaster. "Just busy." A pause. "No, I'm eating." Another pause. "I promise." I remember rolling my eyes slightly because I knew that tone, the automatic reassurance given to parents even when it wasn't true. And for some reason, that moment stuck with me. Weeks passed like that. I learned his schedule without meaning to. Learned when he got home late. Learned that he showered around midnight. Learned that sometimes he played old rock songs and sang along quietly, surprisingly well. It was weirdly comforting. After my breakup, loneliness had become this constant background noise. But hearing another human existence next door, messy, ordinary, real, made my own apartment feel less empty. Still, we never met. I'd heard his entire emotional range, but had never seen his face. That changed because of the smoke alarm. It was a Tuesday evening when it went off, a shrill, relentless beeping that pierced through both our apartments. I jumped up from my desk, heart racing, the smell of burnt something creeping into my space. Through the wall, I heard Hank swear. A cabinet slammed. Footsteps rushed. The alarm kept screaming. I hesitated for maybe 10 seconds before grabbing my hoodie and stepping into the hallway. His door was already cracked open, smoke curling lazily out. And there he was. Hank. He was taller than I expected, dark hair messy like he'd been running his hands through it, wearing a gray t-shirt that clung slightly from sweat. He was waving a dish towel under the alarm while coughing, the same cough I'd heard weeks before. For a second, neither of us spoke. It felt surreal, like meeting a character from a show I'd been binge-watching in secret. I finally said, pointing inside. "You want help?" He looked at me, eyes slightly watery but amused. "You're the neighbor, right?" His voice, clearer now without drywall distortion, sent a weird jolt through me. "Gary," I said. "Hank," he replied, then coughed again. "And yes. Please. Before this thing makes the entire building hate me." We ended up standing on chairs together, fanning the alarm like idiots while burnt toast smoldered in his kitchen sink. Eventually, the noise died, replaced by quiet and the faint hum of his refrigerator. Relief settled between us. Hank let out a breath and laughed softly. "First real meal I've tried cooking in weeks. Apparently toast was too ambitious." I smiled. "Bold move." That earned a tired grin. Up close, he looked worn. Not in a bad way. Just like someone carrying more than he talked about. There were faint circles under his eyes, and his apartment, from the quick glance I took, was neat but sparse, like he hadn't fully moved in emotionally. Thanks for the assist, he said. I owe you one. You don't. I shrugged. I was already listening to the chaos. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Hank raised an eyebrow. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Not in a creepy way. The walls are just thin. He stared for a beat. Then laughed. Good. Because I've definitely heard you talking to yourself during work calls. I groaned. Great. Relax, he said, leaning against the counter. Makes me feel less insane over here. That was the first moment it clicked. The loneliness wasn't one-sided. We stood there awkwardly for another second before he cleared his throat. Well, since my dinner is now charcoal, Hank said, you wanna order takeout with me? It was such a casual question. But something about it felt significant. Like the wall between us, literal and otherwise, had quietly cracked. And I had no idea then how much that simple burnt toast night was going to change everything. I should have said no. That would have been the normal, neighborly thing to do. Smile, wave it off, retreat back into my own apartment, and continue pretending we were just two strangers separated by drywall and burnt toast. Instead, I said, yeah. Sure. Hank's smile was small but genuine. Ty. Always. 20 minutes later, we were sitting on his living room floor because, as he awkwardly admitted, he hadn't bought a couch yet. Just a folded camping chair and a TV balanced on moving boxes. I swear I'm not a serial killer, he said, handing me a plastic container of pad thai. Just slow at settling in. It's minimalist, I offered. It's depression, he corrected lightly, then immediately waved a hand. Kidding. Mostly. There it was. The thing I'd been hearing through the wall. Up close, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tragic music and pacing and late-night sighs. It was just a guy who looked tired of carrying something heavy alone. We ate cross-legged on the rug, knees occasionally brushing in the small space. Conversation started simple. Work, how long we'd lived here, complaints about the building's ancient plumbing. But every so often, there'd be a pause. Not awkward. Just observant. Like we were both recalibrating the image we'd built of each other through sound alone. So, Hank said eventually, chewing thoughtfully, how long have you been listening to my entire life? I choked slightly. I haven't been listening. He smirked. Gary. I sighed. Okay. I might have heard things. Like? I hesitated. It felt strangely intimate, admitting this out loud. Like you calling your mom. And the music. And pacing. His expression softened instead of tightening like I feared it would. Thin walls, he murmured. Yeah. He leaned back on his hands. Guess you know I don't sleep much. I figured. And that I'd burn toast. That too. A beat passed. And? He asked quietly. The question wasn't about toast. I swallowed. And that you sound alone sometimes. The air shifted. Hank looked down at his container, pushing noodles around with his fork. Yeah, he admitted after a moment. I moved here after a breakup. 5 years. Thought we were gonna get married. He let out a small, humorless laugh. Turns out he didn't. Oh. The word settled heavily in my chest. I hadn't known. I hadn't assumed. I'd built a vague silhouette in my mind but never attached pronouns to it. Something in me loosened. Yeah, I said quietly. Same. Different timeline. Same disaster. His eyes flicked up to mine. Really? Really? There's something strange that happens when two gay men realize, without fanfare, that they're both on the same page. No dramatic coming out. No awkward dance around it. Just a subtle shift in gravity. Like the air becomes easier to breathe. Guess the walls have been protecting both our secrets, Hank said softly. Guess so. Silence again. But warmer this time. After dinner, I helped him open a window to clear the lingering smoke smell. The night air drifted in, cool and quiet. We stood side by side for a second, looking out over the parking lot like it was some profound view. You know, Hank said, I almost knocked on your door a few times. I blinked. Why? Because I could hear you laughing on work calls. And sometimes. I don't know. It sounded nice. Like you were okay. That hit harder than it should have. I wasn't, I admitted. Not really. He nodded like he understood too well. From that night on, things changed. It wasn't instant intimacy. It was gradual. Intentional. We started knocking instead of just overhearing. Sometimes I'd bring over coffee in the morning. Sometimes he'd text me. Yes, we exchanged numbers before I left that first night, asking if I wanted to split takeout instead of eating alone. The pacing at night lessened. The music got louder, happier. I'd still hear him through the wall, but now it felt different. Not like eavesdropping. More like background comfort. One evening about 2 weeks later, the cough came back. Harsher this time. I paused my show, listening. A glass clinked. Then silence. I waited. Another cough, followed by a frustrated groan. I didn't overthink it. I grabbed some cold medicine from my bathroom and walked straight to his door. He opened it slower this time. Pale. Eyes tired. Hey, he rasped. You sound terrible. Thanks. I held up the medicine. Peace offering. Or repayment for the toast trauma. He smiled faintly and stepped aside to let me in. His apartment looked slightly more lived in now. A small couch had appeared. A framed photo leaned against the wall, not yet hung. Fever? I asked. Low. I'll live. Sit, I ordered gently. He raised an eyebrow but obeyed, dropping onto the couch. I poured him water, handed him the medicine, and hovered awkwardly for a second before sitting beside him. Close. Not touching. But close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. You don't have to play nurse, he murmured. I know. A quiet beat. Why are you? He asked. I considered lying. Making a joke. Instead, I said the honest thing. Because for months I heard you go through hell alone. And I didn't like it. His breathing slowed. The vulnerability in his eyes right then wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tearful. It was quiet gratitude. Gary, he said softly, you don't owe me anything. I'm not doing it because I owe you. Another silence. This one heavier. Charged. We were close enough now that our shoulders brushed slightly when he shifted. His hand rested on the couch between us, fingers loose, almost touching my thigh. Neither of us moved away. The wall between our apartments had been thin. But the wall between us? That one was finally starting to come down. And I was beginning to realize this wasn't just about helping a neighbor anymore. I didn't plan on staying the night. I really didn't. Hank had taken the medicine, leaned back against the couch, and closed his eyes. Just for a minute. I told myself I'd leave once he fell asleep, that hovering was weird, that this was already towing a line neither of us had defined. But he looked wrecked. Not just sick. Emotionally worn down in a way that felt familiar. So I stayed. At some point, his head tipped sideways and rested against my shoulder. My entire body went rigid. He didn't react. Just breathed. Slow. Warm. I could have shifted away. I didn't. Instead, I adjusted slightly so he was more comfortable. My hand hovered awkwardly near his arm before finally settling lightly against it, not gripping, just grounding. He stirred a little but didn't wake up. The room was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and distant traffic outside. I stared at the blank TV screen across from us, hyper-aware of every inch of contact. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't drywall and coincidence. This was deliberate closeness. After maybe 20 minutes, Hank shifted and blinked awake. Oh, he murmured, realizing where he was. Realizing where I was. He didn't pull away immediately. Sorry, he said softly. It's fine. He looked at me for a second, really looked at me, like he was trying to read something behind my face. You didn't leave. he said. No. A small exhale left him. Most people do. That did something to me. Yeah, I said carefully. I've noticed. He gave a tired half smile at that. We stayed like that longer than we probably should have. Close. Not quite crossing any obvious lines, but definitely standing on one. Eventually, I helped him to his bedroom. That felt bigger than it should have. His room was simple. Clean. A bed, nightstand, one lamp casting warm light. I pulled back the covers while he sat down slowly, still pale. You're not obligated to tuck me in, he muttered, embarrassed. I know. I handed him a glass of water, then hesitated. The moment stretched. Do you? I started, then stopped. He looked up. Do you want me to stay? Just until you fall asleep. There it was. The line. His jaw tightened slightly. Not in discomfort, in thought. Yeah, he admitted quietly. So I stayed. I sat on the edge of his bed while he lay back, staring at the ceiling. The room felt smaller than his living room had. More intimate. More honest. You know what's messed up? He said after a minute. What? I used to hate silence after my breakup. I'd blast music just so I didn't have to hear my own thoughts. He turned his head slightly toward me. But when I heard you through the wall? Typing. Talking. Living. It didn't feel empty anymore. My throat tightened. You should have knocked sooner, I said. Yeah, he whispered. His hand moved slightly on top of the blanket, close to mine resting on the mattress. Close enough that I felt the heat. Neither of us were stupid. This wasn't just neighborly anymore. I shifted my hand an inch. He didn't pull away. Another inch. Our fingers brushed. Static. His breath hitched, just barely, but he didn't move. Didn't retreat. So I let my fingers rest fully against his. Not gripping. Just touching. It felt bigger than it should have. Like crossing a border without paperwork. Gary, he said softly, my name almost a warning. Yeah? I don't want this to be because I'm sick. Or lonely. The honesty in that nearly undid me. It's not, I said. And it wasn't. It had started with observation. Curiosity. Concern. But somewhere between burnt toast and late-night pacing, it had turned into something else. He studied my face for a long moment. Then, slowly, he turned his hand over under mine, lacing our fingers together. The world didn't explode. There was no dramatic shift in lighting. Just two men in a quiet bedroom, choosing each other in small increments. His thumb brushed lightly against my knuckles. Stay, he murmured. I didn't crawl into the bed. I didn't kiss him. Not yet. But I stayed there until his breathing evened out and sleep finally took him. And for the first time since moving into that apartment, the wall between us wasn't the thing connecting our lives. We were. And that scared me a little. Because I was starting to realize helping him wasn't the risk. Letting myself fall for him? That was. The next morning was different. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something had. I woke up on Hank's couch around 6:30 a.m., stiff neck, blanket half falling off me. For a split second, I panicked, disoriented, until I remembered. His bedroom. His hand in mine. The way he said stay like it wasn't casual. I sat up slowly, heart already doing that annoying hopeful thing. The apartment was quiet. No coughing. No pacing. Just soft footsteps from down the hall. A second later, Hank appeared. He looked better. Still pale, but steadier. His hair was damp like he'd splashed water on his face. He was wearing a black t-shirt and gray sweatpants, the kind that hang low on the hips in a way that shouldn't matter but absolutely does. He froze slightly when he saw me sitting up. Hey, he said. Hey. There was a beat of uncertainty. Not regret. Just awareness. You stayed, he said again, like he was still testing the reality of it. Yeah. Another pause. Fever's down, he added, almost awkwardly. Good. We were both circling something bigger. Last night hadn't been impulsive. It hadn't been drunk. It had been quiet and intentional, which somehow made it more vulnerable. Hank stepped further into the living room. You hungry? He asked. I almost laughed at the normalcy of it. Are you planning to burn something else? A faint smirk tugged at his mouth. Low blow. Toast trauma doesn't fade overnight. That earned a real laugh. Soft. Relieved. The tension eased slightly. He moved into the kitchen, and I followed without thinking. We ended up standing side by side again, closer this time, like we both remembered what it felt like to touch. He cracked eggs into a pan. I leaned against the counter, watching him. You can hear everything through that wall, right? He said suddenly, not looking at me. Pretty much. He nodded slowly. Last week, he continued, you were on a call. You said you were finally starting to feel okay again. I blinked. I barely remembered saying that. Yeah? You sounded surprised when you said it. That hit. Guess I was, I admitted. He turned off the stove and faced me. I think I was starting to feel okay too, he said quietly. Before I even realized why. My pulse picked up. The space between us shrank again, not physically yet, but emotionally. Hank, I started carefully. If this is too fast. It's not. Immediate. Firm. He stepped closer. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just deliberate. I don't want this to be some rebound thing, he said. Or a loneliness fix. I've done that before. It never ends well. Same. So if we do this. His eyes held mine. Steady. Searching. It's because we actually want to. There was something incredibly attractive about the way he said that. No games. No vague half-steps. Just clarity. I want to, I said. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been bracing for a different answer. Okay, he murmured. And this time when the silence fell between us, it wasn't uncertain. It was charged. He was close enough now that I could feel the warmth from his body again. My hands rested at my sides, but every nerve in me was hyper-aware of him. You were holding my hand, he said softly. You noticed? Hard not to. A slight smile flickered across his face. You didn't pull away. Neither did you. Another step closer. We were inches apart now. The kitchen felt smaller than his bedroom had. Gary, he said, my name lower this time. Yeah? Can I kiss you? That did it. Not the question itself, the fact that he asked. I didn't answer with words. I closed the distance. Slow. Intentional. Our lips met gently at first, cautious, testing. It wasn't explosive. It was warm. Real. He tasted faintly like mint and morning air. His hand slid to my waist, not gripping tightly, just anchoring me there. My hands found his sides, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. He pulled back slightly, forehead resting against mine. Okay, he whispered, almost to himself. Okay, I echoed. And then he kissed me again, deeper this time. Not desperate. Just certain. Months of hearing his life through a wall had built something neither of us fully understood. But standing there in his kitchen, sunlight creeping through the window, his hands steady on my body, it didn't feel like we were rushing. It felt like we were finally stepping into something that had been quietly growing all along. No drywall. No distance. Just us. And for the first time since I moved into that apartment, I wasn't just listening to his life anymore. I was part of it. After that kiss, nothing immediately dramatic happened. No clothes on the floor. No frantic escalation. No cinematic music swelling in the background. Just two guys standing in a small kitchen, breathing a little heavier than before, realizing something real had just shifted. Hank was the first to move. Not away, just enough to lean his forehead against mine again, like he needed a second to steady himself. That was... he started. Yeah, I said. He laughed softly under his breath. Very articulate, Gary. I'm overwhelmed. That makes two of us. His hands were still resting lightly on my waist. Not gripping. Not pulling. Just there. Warm. Present. It struck me then how different this felt from past relationships, even the good ones. There was no performance here. No pressure to act a certain way. Just mutual discovery unfolding at its own pace. I used to imagine what you looked like, Hank admitted suddenly. I blinked. Through the wall? Yeah. A sheepish smile tugged at his mouth. Your voice sounded like someone who smiled when they talked. That's weirdly specific. Was I wrong? I couldn't help smiling at that. He noticed immediately. Nope, he said quietly. The eggs were forgotten on the stove, cooling while we lingered in the moment. Eventually Hank cleared his throat and stepped back, turning the burner off completely like reality was slowly re-entering the room. Sit, he said. You stayed all night. Least I can do is feed you. I obeyed, sliding onto one of the kitchen stools while he plated breakfast. The normalcy of it grounded us both. Plates clinked. Coffee brewed. Morning light filled the apartment in soft gold. But underneath all that ordinary movement, there was an awareness now. Every glance lasted a little longer. Every accidental brush of hands lingered. When he set my plate down, his fingers tapped lightly against mine instead of pulling away immediately. Small things. But loud. We ate facing each other across the counter. You know, I said between bites. It's funny. I spent months hearing your life and thinking I understood you. Yeah? Turns out I didn't. Not really. Hank tilted his head. Good or bad? Good, I said honestly. You're warmer than I expected. That made him pause. I thought you were untouchable, I added. Like you had everything handled. He laughed, genuinely surprised. Gary, I cried to sad playlists at 1 a.m. Through the wall. I know. That earned a grin. Fair. A comfortable quiet settled while we finished eating. Not the heavy silence of strangers, but the easy kind that comes when presence alone feels like conversation. Afterward, we migrated to the couch. This time, sitting together felt natural. Our shoulders touched almost immediately. No hesitation. Hank stretched his arm along the back of the couch, not quite around me, but close enough that the space between intention and action felt razor thin. You nervous? He asked. A little. About what? I considered that. Messing this up, I admitted. I like what this is. Whatever it is. His expression softened. Me too. A beat passed. Then his arms slid fully around my shoulders. It wasn't dramatic. Just a quiet decision. I leaned into him without thinking. The contact felt steady. Grounding. Like finding the exact position your body had been unconsciously searching for. We're allowed to take this slow, Hank murmured. I want to. Good. His thumbs started tracing absent-minded patterns against my upper arm. Not flirtatious. Not calculated. Just soothing. It made my chest ache in the best way. You know what's wild? I said after a minute. What? If those walls weren't so thin, this probably wouldn't be happening. He smiled into my hair. Yeah. But I think we still would have found each other. Confident. Observant, he corrected. You kept showing up before we even met. I frowned slightly. How? You laughed loud enough for both apartments, he said. You played music while cleaning. You talked to yourself when you were thinking. I groaned. Oh my God! You sounded alive, he finished softly. That shut me up. Because I understood exactly what he meant. I turned my head to look at him. And you sounded like someone worth checking on. The moment hung between us, quiet, sincere, unguarded. No walls. No distance. Just mutual witnessing. Hank leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to my temple. Not hungry. Not urgent. Affectionate. And somehow that felt even more intimate. We spent the rest of the morning like that, talking, laughing, occasionally falling into comfortable silence while the city outside carried on unnoticed. At one point, I realized something that made my chest tighten. I wasn't wondering what would happen next. I wasn't analyzing timelines or worrying about labels. I was just here. With Hank. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. But what I didn't realize yet was that the real shift in our story wasn't the kiss. It was what came after, when two people who had survived loneliness finally had to learn how to share space, vulnerability, and the quiet fear of losing something good. And that part was only just beginning. The weird thing about happiness after loneliness is that it feels fragile. Like holding something warm in cold hands, comforting, but you keep waiting for it to disappear. The first week after Hank and I kissed settled into something soft and almost domestic. Not dating, exactly. But not dating either. We didn't label it. We just kept showing up. Mornings started blending together. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of his coffee grinder through the wall and smile before even opening my eyes. Other times, I'd open my door to find a paper cup sitting outside with my name scribbled on it. One morning, I texted him. "Did you just coffee delivery my front door like a rom-com character?" His reply came instantly. "Don't ruin my mysterious persona." We started spending most evenings together by default. Dinner at mine. Movie at his. Random grocery runs that turned into laughing in the cereal aisle for no reason. And yet, there was this quiet restraint between us. The physical side hadn't rushed forward. Kisses lingered. Hands held. Couch cuddling that felt suspiciously like dating but without the formal declaration. It was intentional. Careful. One night, about 10 days after that morning kitchen kiss, we were sitting on my balcony. The air was cold enough that our shoulders pressed together automatically under a shared blanket. Below us, the city hummed. "You ever think about how strange this is?" Hank asked. "What part?" "The fact that I knew the sound of your laugh before I knew your face." I smiled. "I knew your sad playlist rotation." "Brutal." A quiet beat passed. "But also kind of beautiful," he added. I turned toward him slightly. "Yeah? Yeah." His voice softened. "We met without expectations. No profiles. No first date performance. Just existence leaking through drywall." That phrasing made my chest ache. "I think I trusted you before I met you," he said. The honesty caught me off guard. "Why?" I asked. "Because you sounded kind," he answered simply. I looked down at my hands under the blanket, suddenly shy in a way that felt teenage and ridiculous. "Gary," he said gently. "Yeah? I'm scared of messing this up." There it was. The fragile thing. I exhaled slowly. "Me too." His fingers found mine under the blanket. "I don't want to rush," he continued. "But I also don't want to pretend this is casual when it doesn't feel casual." My heart kicked up. "It doesn't feel casual," I admitted. He nodded, relieved. "But I also don't want to build something out of fear," I added. "Like clinging because we were lonely." Hank squeezed my hand lightly. "That's fair." The conversation lingered in that vulnerable space, not heavy, but real. "I like you," he said finally. Simple. Clear. No dramatic speech. "I like you too," I replied. He smiled, that small, genuine smile I was starting to crave. "Good," he murmured. The moment didn't escalate physically. Instead, we just sat there, shoulders touching, hands intertwined, the city lights blinking below like quiet witnesses. Later that night, back inside, we ended up on the couch again. Predictable at this point. I was half lying against him, his arm around me, some random sitcom playing unnoticed. "You know," I said lazily. The pacing stopped. "Hmm? You don't pace at night anymore." He was quiet for a second. "I didn't realize." "I did." Another pause. "Sleep's easier," he said softly. The implication sat between us. Sleep's easier because you're here. I turned my head slightly to look at him. And you? He asked. You still talk to yourself during work calls? Only the important arguments. He chuckled, chest vibrating under my cheek. Silence followed, comfortable and warm. But then something shifted. Subtle. I felt his breathing slow, his hand absent-mindedly tracing circles on my arm again, that same soothing pattern from before. My chest tightened with affection so sudden it almost scared me. Hank, I murmured. Yeah? This feels safe. He stilled slightly at that. Good safe or scary safe? He asked. Both. He nodded like that made perfect sense. I think that's what real safe feels like, he said. I tilted my head up. Our eyes met. There was a softness there that hadn't existed weeks ago. Not infatuation. Not curiosity. Recognition. I leaned up and kissed him. Slow. Unhurried. A kiss that felt less like discovery and more like confirmation. His hand slid to my jaw, holding me there gently. When we pulled apart, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Because the truth was becoming obvious in quiet increments. This wasn't just neighbors becoming friends. Or loneliness finding company. This was two lives that had been running parallel behind a wall finally intertwining. And the closer we got, the more I realized the biggest step wasn't intimacy. It was letting someone hear the parts of your life that even thin walls couldn't reveal. And Hank was about to hear mine. I didn't expect my past to show up on a Thursday afternoon. Life with Hank had settled into something quietly meaningful. We weren't labeling it yet, but routines had formed around each other like muscle memory. Coffee outside doors. Shared dinners. Movie nights that ended with me half asleep against him. It felt steady. Safe. Which is probably why the text rattled me so much. Ethan, hey. I know it's been a while. Can we talk? I stared at my phone like it had personally offended me. Ethan. 5 years. The breakup that had sent me scrambling into apartment 3B. The voice that used to fill my mornings before silence replaced it. I hadn't heard from him in almost a year. My stomach twisted in that old, familiar way, not longing, just unfinished echoes. Gary? I looked up. Hank was standing in my doorway holding 2 coffees, expression shifting immediately when he saw my face. What's wrong? I hesitated. And that hesitation said everything. He stepped inside slowly, setting the coffees down without breaking eye contact. Talk to me, he said gently. I swallowed. My ex texted. There it was. No drama. Just truth. Hank didn't react the way I feared. No jealousy. No defensiveness. Just a quiet nod as he leaned against the counter. How do you feel? He asked. That question hit harder than anything else could have. I don't know, I admitted. Surprised. A little unsettled. He nodded again, absorbing that. You don't have to answer him right away. I know. Silence stretched between us, not tense but careful. I don't want this to mess with us, I said finally. Hank's gaze softened. Gary, he said, your past isn't competition. The simplicity of that made my chest ache. But it matters, I said. It shaped me. It shaped why I ended up here. Why I was so alone. He stepped closer. And that led you to me, he said quietly. I looked at him, heart tugging in ways I couldn't fully articulate. That doesn't erase what you had, he added. It just means your story kept going. God, he was good at this. At making space instead of demanding certainty. I'm scared of reopening old wounds, I admitted. Then don't, he said simply. I blinked. You get to choose what doors stay closed. Hank continued. Healing doesn't mean revisiting everything. That felt freeing. I exhaled, tension easing from my shoulders. Thank you, I said. For what? For not making this weird. He smiled faintly. I'm internally extremely cool about everything. I snorted. The heaviness cracked. A moment later, my phone buzzed again. Another text. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I reached for Hank's hand. His fingers intertwined with mine immediately, like the gesture had become second nature. I think, I said slowly, I spent a long time thinking love was supposed to be loud. Big gestures. Big fights. Big reconciliations. Hank listened quietly. But this? I squeezed his hand lightly. This feels quiet. And steady. And real. His expression shifted, that soft vulnerability I'd come to recognize. I like quiet, he admitted. Me too. We stood there for a second, hands linked, afternoon light spilling across the floor between us. You don't have to tell me everything right now, Hank said. I want to, I replied. Just maybe not all at once. That sounds healthy and terrifying. Exactly. He laughed softly. Whenever you're ready, he said. And I believed him. That night we stayed in. No movies. No distractions. Just talking. I told him pieces. How Ethan and I met, how we built a life that looked solid from the outside, how the ending had been quiet and slow rather than explosive. Hank didn't interrupt much. Just listened. Occasionally asking small questions that showed he cared about understanding, not analyzing. At one point, I paused mid-story. What? He asked. I don't feel heavy telling you this. That's good. It's new. He reached over and brushed his thumb along my wrist, grounding familiar. You're not carrying it alone, he said. That simple statement shifted something deep inside me. Later, when words ran out, we ended up lying on opposite ends of the couch, legs tangled in the middle. Comfortable. Tired. Safe. Gary? Hank murmured. Yeah? I'm really glad the walls were thin. I smiled into the dim room. Me too. Because somewhere between overheard laughter, shared meals, quiet confessions, and gentle kisses, the man whose life I once only heard through drywall had become the person I trusted most to hear my silence. And as I drifted off beside him, one thought lingered softly in my chest. Sometimes love doesn't arrive like a grand entrance. Sometimes it just starts as a sound through the wall, and slowly becomes the voice you want beside you when the world gets quiet. It wasn't dramatic when we finally said it. No rainstorm. No airport chase. No desperate confession in the middle of the night. It happened on a Sunday. Ordinary. Quiet. Real. About 3 weeks after Ethan's text, life had fully settled into something that felt less like whatever this is, and more like a relationship without us formally calling it one. Hank had started keeping a toothbrush at my place. I had a drawer in his bedroom. We still technically had 2 apartments, but most nights ended the same way. Together. That Sunday, we were reorganizing his living room. The once empty space now had a real couch, shelves, a rug that didn't look like it came from a dorm clearance bin. Your apartment looks like someone lives here now, I teased. Rude. I lived here before. You existed here. He rolled his eyes. We were hanging a framed photo on the wall, one he'd finally decided to unpack. It wasn't of his ex like I half feared when I first noticed it weeks ago. It was a picture of him and his mom at some random family barbecue. You ready? He asked, holding the frame steady while I adjusted the nail. Yeah. A little left. He shifted it slightly. Perfect. He stepped back. I stepped back. We stood shoulder to shoulder, looking at the finished wall. Something about it felt symbolic. Like watching him reclaim his space. You know, he said quietly, this apartment used to feel like a placeholder. For what? For the life I thought I'd have. My chest tightened. And now? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward me fully. Now it feels like the beginning of something. There it was. That word again. Beginning. He reached for my hand, casual, automatic. I used to think I needed everything figured out before I let someone in again, he admitted. Like I had to be fully healed. Fully stable. Fully independent. You are independent, I said softly. He smiled faintly. Yeah. But I don't feel alone anymore. The honesty in that made my throat tight. I don't either, I said. He studied my face for a long moment, searching, like he always did when he was about to say something real. You know what the weirdest part is? He asked. What? I fell for you before I even saw you. I laughed lightly. You fell for my voice through drywall. I fell for how you sounded alive, he corrected. How you didn't let silence swallow you. I shook my head slightly. I wasn't that strong. You were. Silence fell between us. Not awkward. Not heavy. Just full. And suddenly I realized something. We'd been building this quietly for months, from overheard laughter to shared dinners to vulnerable confessions. We'd already done the hard part. Trust. I stepped closer. So what are we doing? I asked softly. He didn't flinch. We're choosing each other, he said. Not trying. Not seeing where it goes. Choosing. Present tense. Every day. I felt something settle deep in my chest. Hank, I said, voice steady but vulnerable. I love you. It slipped out naturally. No build-up. No fear. Just truth. He didn't look shocked. He didn't hesitate. His hand tightened around mine. I love you too, Gary. Simple. Certain. And somehow bigger than any grand confession could have been. He pulled me into him, and this time the kiss wasn't cautious or exploratory. It was grounded. Confident. A kiss that said we're here now. Later that night, we lay in his bed, my bed, sometimes, the city quiet outside the windows. No pacing. No sad playlists. Just steady breathing. You ever think about how different this could have been? He murmured. How? If the walls were thicker. I smiled in the dark. Then we would have missed each other. Yeah. A beat. I'm glad I heard you, he added. I turned slightly, brushing my nose against his cheek. I'm glad I knocked. Because that's what it came down to. Not fate. Not coincidence. Just two lonely men separated by drywall, choosing to stop listening from a distance and step into each other's lives. The wall was still there. But it didn't divide us anymore. It just reminded us how close we'd been all along. And every night after that, when I heard his breathing beside me instead of through plaster, I knew. Sometimes love doesn't start with fireworks. Sometimes it starts with a cough through the wall. And becomes the quiet, steady heartbeat you fall asleep next to.